You are listening to Eastmans Fly Cast, an adventure fly fishing specific podcast covering travel, tactics, and next level insight. Now your host, Brian Barney.
Hey, what's happening, guys? Got a brand new Eastmans Fly Cast for you. So this week on the podcast, I have on Max and Brady from Avidmax. Man, these guys are both super fishy, and it made for a great conversation. Max is up in Alaska, and so he's got some unreal fishing for giant rainbows and salmon, and so we kind of talk about that throughout the podcast. And then Brady, he's located in Colorado, and so we talk a lot about Colorado fly fishing, and then just talk about Avidmax a bit, the company they work for. But it's a great podcast. I really enjoyed it. I think you guys will enjoy it too. I want to thank our sponsor for today's show, Avidmax. Avidmax is a great online retail store. They also have an in-store location right outside of Denver there. And just like the two guys on the podcast today, they have a super knowledgeable staff that can outfit you from everything from bonefish to the flats, to steelhead to the coast, to trout fishing out west. They've got absolutely everything for fly fishing, from rods, reels, lines, tippet, flies, and they have a bunch of fly tying material. And they also put out a bunch of good content themselves. So they do a fly tying Tuesday. They've got a great pro staff of really knowledgeable fishermen. They're just a great company. So if you're in the market for anything fly fishing, make sure to check out avidmax.com. And with that, let's get into this podcast. So we've got Brady and Max on the line, and man, we just get talking fly fishing. It's great conversation. So I'm your host, Brian Barney. This is Eastman's Fly Cast. Here we go.
All right, I'm live here. Got a couple of the guys from Avidmax. So I've got Brady online, and then I've also got Max. And Max is just returning from Alaska. He fishes up there in the Kenai and says those big rainbows are starting to turn on. It's been pretty good, huh, Max?
Yeah, we're heading into that part of the year, starting to see the carnage on the rivers, and those big rainbows starting to show up. So next couple of weeks should be pretty fun up there.
Man, super cool. Yeah, I can't help but be a little bit jealous. And then here in Montana, we're starting to get a good cool down. I was a little bit worried about our water here until August showed up. So Brady, you're located in Colorado. Are you seeing that same cool down, or is it still pretty hot there?
We are. No, definitely. We've had some good rain in the last couple of weeks, and the rivers they're pushing more out of the reservoirs, which is great for the fish. Early season was really scary for us this year. With low water, Colorado was lower than it has been in a long, long time, if not ever. But they finally got some water pushing, and things are looking better for sure. And then taking advantage of different opportunities and just kind of going into the high country is my main goal, to kind of get away from that and find different options to leave those fish at peace through the summer and get up and do some trekking and find some altitude fish. So,
oh, good for you. Yeah, those high altitude lakes are so fun in the summer, and especially when we get so much pressure on the rivers. Like, I live on one of the most pressured rivers in Montana, being the Madison River, and I love to fish it. And I got a great brown last weekend, like just a specimen of the river, just this beautiful colored brown that had to be pushing 24. But it's like finding those opportunities midsummer to hike to those high mountain lakes can be some great fishing. So that's what you like to do in the summertime as well, huh?
definitely. Yeah, you work for it for sure, but the rewards are bountiful. You get up there and you get away from people. You find fish that don't get fished to. You don't see them as pressured. They're eager to take dry flies, rise into big foam flies, and can just be a lot of fun. And if you find the right place, you can find some special fish too.
Right on. Eating foam flies. There's nothing better than fishing foam that floats. Max, do you guys have any dry flies when you're fishing there in Alaska that you'll get those big rainbows to take, like big mouse patterns? Or are you guys fishing more nymph setups or streamers or all of the above?
Yeah, so, do a lot of backcountry fishing where we're using helicopters to get kind of where we need to get. And, that's the dry flies, the mouse pattern. So, got a couple that we tie in-house that seem to be more productive than others, just improved hookup rates. And that's really where the fly tying, I think, comes into things, just being able to manipulate the fly how you want to fish how you want it. But then, you can throw smaller foam flies, like a little hippie stomper works great for fishing, grayling. But even on those hot days, trout will come up and eat those foam flies as well.
Hippie Stomper, that's such a great name. I love some of the fly names, that come out there. But yeah, you guys kill it over there at Avidmax. Like, I've been watching that Fly Tying Tuesday that you guys get on and tie a bunch of patterns on there. And then your social media is great as well. But yeah, you guys are making a huge push in the industry just by putting out quality content. And so, Max, you mentioned like tying on these things, like it makes such a difference, like the pattern, the shape and the size, but then also the action. Like, I know I'm, and I think everybody out there is becoming streamer junkies, and streamers are like one of those things that you have to do everything right all day, and then you get rewarded for it. Like, you have to read the water right, put the fly where it needs to be, and fish it correctly. But the payoffs can be few and far in between, But with those streamer flies, like, what are you tying to get a really good action and kick out of that fly?
Yeah, I'd probably consider myself a bit of a streamer junkie. There's just a lot you can manipulate with tying different types of streamers. Size is obviously a big one. The head on the fly makes a big difference of, what material you're using. Weight has a lot to play, and then just like overall profile and the type of materials you're putting into it to either increase or decrease how quickly it sinks or gets into the part of the water column you're trying to fish. And that's just something that you don't have a lot of control of just buying things out of the bin, so we try and kind of include our own tips and tricks and methods into tying in our tutorials and kind of walk you through why we would do what we do. And with streamers, it's no exception. There's a lot to manipulate, and got to make it the way that you want it to fish.
Yeah, absolutely. That big head, moving that water in front of that fly is such a big one, And then, I like the wiggle or the kick of that thing, and it's wild. Like, it seems like those fish. Gosh, I fished like the Yellowstone that's close to me. That's a big river close to me not too long ago. And it actually looked like chocolate. It looked like less than a foot of visibility, almost where I wouldn't have even fished it. And they ate a streamer so good that day, and they're not seeing it. They're just feeling it. They're feeling it on their lateral lines. They're feeling it move that water. And sure, maybe they're seeing that dark profile as you look up or whatever. But yeah, that moving that water is such a big deal with those things. So Brady, you fish a lot of streamers in Colorado, or is it more dry fly and nymphs, or kind of all of the above?
Yeah, definitely a range of opportunity here for sure. If you're fishing bigger water, you're fishing the Colorado, a lot of opportunity for streamers. Down on the Eagle River as well is a great place to throw some meat. But you can do anything and everything here across the strait. So much of our water is technical tailwater that's fished year-round with tiny nymphs in sizes 20s, 22s, 24s. Down south on the San Juan, you're going even smaller sometimes, to your tributaries of all of those great rivers and your dry dropper setups. So for me, it's kind of the variety. I really enjoy mixing it up, playing around with different techniques, targeting fish the way that I want to target them kind of on that day and figuring them out, and playing around with things, which is a great aspect of fly fishing. And the technicality is there's a world of opportunity, and so much of that goes into fly tying as well, that you can spend the time behind the vise, regardless of the technique that you're fishing, to design and play around with patterns so that they're unique to you, using new and different materials, designing flies and different takes on flies that have been out there to be a little bit different, to fish them differently, to get different success points, and just have a lot of fun with it.
Gosh, that makes such good sense. Like, and I tie a bunch myself, but I also, I'll buy other good ties that I see, and you guys sell ties in a bunch of good ones. But there's something to be said for original patterns, and like when you develop these patterns yourself, and you're fishing them on a river or like a high pressure river like the Madison. Like, having your own patterns that they don't sell at any shops. It's brand new to these fish, but it's still imitating the aquatic life that's in that river. It just seems to be like an absolute game changer for me. Like I've got a couple go-to patterns, and they can even be simple, just like a pheasant tail. But you can't buy a pheasant tail like I tie at the shop. The attention to detail with the legs, the pheasant tail fibers that swim on the back and really bring life to it. And so, like, I think it's great. Like, you guys. You're not just into it to make a buck. You're into it to make better fly fishermen, like to get people more success. And then they appreciate your company and come back to it. I just think that's such a beautiful thing with your guys' focus on fly tying. But wouldn't you agree, like those patterns that nobody else fishes, like they just seem to fish better, don't they?
Very much so. Yeah, definitely. You get something out there that they haven't seen before that's still a good profile, a good color contrast, you get it in the right spot, and they want to try it, right? Fish are such tactile eaters. They see something different a lot of times. They want to try that more than they would something that looks like something they might be eating all day long. It just comes in front of their face. They're going to touch it and try it, and you can get a lot of success in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, oh yeah, spot on. And talking about tactics, like we were just discussing, like using what works. Like fishing is such a learning as you go, and most current information, and what worked yesterday might not work today. And like this past weekend where we caught that great big one, like I'm such a streamer junkie, but these fish, as the water got warmer, they're really sitting in heavy water. They're not sitting in cut banks anymore. They're sitting in like the deepest water with good flow, good oxygen through it, and they're sitting down in there in deep. And so, like the tactic that we found that worked this past weekend was we were dead drifting them. So we were drifting them behind an indicator, fishing a big sculpin pattern, and then we were fishing a smaller nymph behind them. And it was wild, like they were eating the smaller nymph behind it, but when I switched to two smaller nymphs, we wouldn't catch anything. It was like that lead bug or that lead streamer was really grabbing their attention, and then they were eating that trailer bug, and then, caught like that great big 24-incher that, very rarely eats the small stuff in this river. Like, you just don't see many of those fish when you're nymphing that stuff. But with the streamer in front, it just seemed to attract them, and we'd just light them up. And anytime we went away from it, we wouldn't catch anything. But it is such like a feel on the river and what's working and what's paying attention, and also paying attention to where you're catching fish, like those deep runs where we're catching. We actually caught that big one like in a confluence of two streams coming together, right there in the middle of it, in this big deep run in there. And so it is just like paying attention to what's around you. Like how much of the fishing is that up there up north, Max? Like up in Alaska, like you're in the Kenai, right? And you're fishing these big rainbows, and you say they're just turning on now, but they've been in this system like all year long. What's making them turn on now, or what tactics are you using or picking up on that's making the fishing so good right now?
Totally. I mean, early season, definitely have a lot of opportunity throwing streamers. Dead drifting streamers is definitely a very successful way to find those fish. But now kind of every salmon species has hit the river. The sockeye are kind of starting to spawn. All the kings are starting to spawn. And then the cohos are definitely working their way in there. And, pinks come on even years very heavily, but even on odd years, they still show up in pretty good numbers. Just the even years, there are so many you can pretty much walk across them. With the trout really starting to key in this time of year, it's because those fish are starting to actually drop eggs. And the trout know that. They've been following them, they've been chasing them. Even those steelhead that are making their way out of the ocean into the river are following and starting to key in on those eggs. And that's where you see some of those bigger fish on the Kenai, is just waiting to gorge on eggs. So that season is kind of right here, and looking forward to the next couple weeks.
Dude, what a wild adventure to be able to heli to some of those spots and some of those remote rivers and fish. That is just amazing, dude. And like the silvers, God, those cohos, they just fight so hard, like the the kings are so big, and I love to catch those, but those silvers are so acrobatic and so fun to catch. Like, if you had to rate the species up there, it sounds like you're really into these big trout and these big rainbows, but if you had to rate the species up there, like what's the funnest to fish for you?
I mean, definitely trout is the top for me personally. Cohos would probably be second, maybe up there with kings. But king's very short, just with the limited number of runs that they've had. King's fishing's been closed down in certain areas, and it's not what it used to be. So probably second would be the coho, because they will take a fly more consistently than if you were swinging for a sockeye. And that's just flossing basically, so you're actually trying to put the fly in their mouth, as opposed to coho, which will kind of take the fly out of aggression, where you can fish different color streamers, and that's where you see those pinks, purples, chartreuse. Like they'll eat anything that pisses them off enough. So
man, that is just wild. Yeah, like man, it's got to be so fun to be able to go up there and fish every year for those different species like that. You use that Alaskan bead setup up there. Like, gosh, it is so effective across the West and across everywhere. And I don't know the purist, like, it's not a tied fly or anything, but there's just something to like that trout bead with a trailing hook on it, trailing barbless hook that is so effective. Do you guys use that up where you're at?
Yeah, the bead is definitely king kind of this time of year, but I guess where you tie your own flies would be the flesh flies. So you have all of these people catching numerous amounts of salmon, filleting the fish on the river, and dropping carcasses into the river. So we're tying flesh flies, which is basically like a salmon carcass or chunks of a salmon carcass floating downriver, and those bigger trout will actually eat pieces and or bits of those salmon floating down the river. So you can really manipulate and mix some beads in with the flesh flies, but chunking those big flesh flies is pretty fun.
Oh, that's wild. Brady, how's the hopper season been in Colorado? Like, we had a good hopper season, and then with this cool weather and all this rain, it kind of knocked it down to where we're not getting as many eats on the hoppers. Like, how was your guys' season on top?
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that, but in the last week or two, it's been definitely on terrestrial season. It's been really good. Not just hoppers, but ants and beetles and that kind of stuff. Fish are definitely looking up. They're in the faster water. They're in that oxygenated water right now. But looking for opportunity on the surface, which is, as you know, just a really fun time of year to get that reaction and that very visual take. It's a short window, but something we all look forward to for sure.
Oh, dude, it's the funnest. When you can get them to come up on a dry fly, it's the ultimate. Like, we have some of the same hatches that you guys do, like the salmon fly hatch, and then hoppers are really good. And, gosh, I'm glad you mentioned, like, flying ants. In fact, like, just yesterday on my job site, I was seeing a bunch of them, and I had my Yeti cooler open at the house. I had it airing out, and I came home, and there must have been 100 flying ants in those things. So they're starting to come off in our neck of the woods too, and I've got to try to tap into that a little bit, as it's so fun to see them come up and eat on the surface. That's just the absolute ultimate, and that's kind of what summer's for. Like, I love the off-season fishing on all our rivers, but when it gets to summertime, like, I just love watching a dry fly fish. But so much of a dry fly, like talking about tying again, so much of a dry fly is the presentation or how it fishes. Like you mentioned those foam flies. Like, gosh, you got to have a dry fly that'll float really well, that you can see, that you can mend. And that's almost what I look for in dry fly patterns, is the ones that are really going to fish well, And I notice, like, one of the biggest mistakes guys make with dry flies is just casting those things too much. And especially, like, fishing from a drift boat, it's just like, let it sit, let it drift, let those fish see it. And there's so many different lines those fish can be in. So it doesn't matter whether you're, right on the bank or whether you're out a foot. Like just keep it and mend on it and keep it up there to where those fish can see it and time it and come up and eat it. Do you guys see the same thing in Colorado, like fishing those things, like letting them drift and then fishing flies that fish really well versus a pattern that the fish like to eat? Or how do you weigh that out when you're tying or when you're fishing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the bench, a lot of times for me, it's trying to find something that's simple, that's going to work well, that I can tie a bunch of and get out on the water, especially with foam flies. And talking about the flying ants a little bit, there's one we did recently, the Carl's foam, which is just a super simple fly, but it fishes so well because it's mostly just foam. It's really buoyant. It's a simple profile and silhouette that fish love to look for, that encourages a lot of takes. And you're right, fishing them, you want to give them the opportunity for sure. You got to hit that right water at the right time, get it over at the right time. But you can also play around with it, which is a fun thing, because the dead drift, while it's super important, like you talked about, in a lot of situations, sometimes they're looking for a little twitch, a little reaction strike. And so you can kind of twitch your fly and play around and do some different things, which just makes it a lot more fun too. And figuring that out during the day, because it might not be the same situation during the same day. One way is going to work better than the other way, is a lot of the fun as well.
Oh, man, it sure is. Yeah, what about you, Max? Like, seeing those dry flies, like seeing them eat those mouse patterns has to be absolutely incredible. And when you talk about big rainbows, like, what kind of size are you guys pulling up there? Like, it's almost gonna scare me to tell me what the size is up there. But dude, that's got to be unreal to watch him eat a mouse.
Totally. Up in northern Alaska, where we're doing those heli trips, that's typically where we see the best mouse fishing, on those smaller creeks. Fish range probably 18 to 24 inches very consistently. Not uncommon to take a fish in that 26, 27 range.
Oh, wow.
And this is still kind of like early season, even before they've had a chance to actually eat eggs and fatten up. When a trout puts on a couple of pounds just within a couple of weeks from eating eggs, changes the dynamic of the fight a little bit. But then on the Kenai, it's not uncommon this time of year to find that 30-incher or 30-inch plus rainbow. So that's something to be expected in the next couple weeks in a picture somewhere.
Ah, wild. Yeah, you guys run a great social media at Avidmax, but I got to follow you personally to see some of those fish that you're coming up with. Dude, the fight on those big fish is unreal. And then, like you say, it changes the dynamic of the fight when they're feeding on those eggs. So much energy, good water temperature. Like, it's absolutely perfect conditions for an all-out rodeo with those things. And, man, you got to have your stuff dialed to fight a big fish like that. It takes, like, all... it's all experience and reactions when you get a big fish on there. Is like your angle to that fish, trying to keep 90 from the bank, don't want them to get too far down on you or too far up on you. Like, what are some of the other tricks and tactics you use when you're catching those giant fish and when you hook up? Or how do you advise your clients when they're playing those big fish to give them the best chance at landing them?
Totally. Gear has a lot to go into it. Much like you would fight a fish on a smaller, tippet, like a 4X, 5X, 6X kind of stuff. Rod angle has a lot to play with that. One of the biggest things I definitely work with people on is moving their feet.
Yes.
A lot of people get those cement feet and they don't want to move. You got to move your body sometimes to whatever the situation plays to. And then also just like when you're actually starting to fish at a particular fish, maybe you see it or that there's going to be fish holding in a certain area. I want to put myself in the best possible position before I even cast, to where if I do hook a fish, I'm going to have a better chance at landing that fish. So that's, I think, really big just right off the bat, to put yourself in a good spot to where you have a little bit more control, unless that fish does what he wants to do. You can kind of counter it with doing the opposite of what he wants to do, and you wrangle him a little bit more the way you want to. Rod angle, though, I think is definitely one of the biggest. But we're also fishing 0X because they're not really as leader or tippet shy. So you can get away with a lot on 0X.
Oh, man after my own heart. I love to fish heavier tippet. Like, when I started on these rivers out here, I was always fishing light tippet, and you bust a lot of fish, and they get and that your line just gets beat up, and it's always like important and smart to like redo your leader and tie on new line for a fresh day of fishing, or even midway through the day. But I started to catch a bunch more fish and bigger fish just switching to heavier tippet, and our fish up here aren't too line shy, which is surprising. Even high pressure fish, I've just noticed that I can go up, and I mean a lot of times my salmon flies, I'm fishing 0x as well, throwing in the brush a lot, and it doesn't seem to bother those fish a bit. And even nymphing setups 1x, 2x. I mean, 3x is about as small as I'll go, but there are those circumstances, like I caught some awesome dry fly hatches early summer on these small betas on this small system, and they were great fish, like those 18 to 23 inch browns that were coming up and eating these betas, and they were definitely line shy, and so I had to go to 5x. And sure enough, the first one I had on, I snapped, because I'm used to that heavier tippet, and I had to get used to fighting them on those things, and it was a rodeo with those big fish and full of it on that small tippet. Max, I hear in Colorado, like there's a lot of line shy fish. Do you find that you have to fish that the smaller tippet? And like, what do you guys offer at Avidmax? Like, I know that there's some tippet out there that's super strong. Like, what do you recommend for guys when you have to go to that lighter tippet just to have more strength into that leader? So maybe start with Colorado fishing and your tippet size, and then lead into what guys should be fishing.
Yeah, so I probably am a little more on your page there with using the heavier stuff and almost forcing the fish to eat my flies regardless of what size tippet I'm using. Guided for a number of years in Colorado as well, and I was fishing 3x, 4x, even like 2x down to just like my lead fly, and still had a lot of success. So there is a lot of technology currently that is just minimizing actual size of the tippet to the actual break strength that you're getting, and I think every manufacturer is doing a pretty excellent job with that. I really like Trout Hunter, and I really like Scientific Anglers. I think they're both making the best strides. Scientific Angler has their new Supreme Absolute Supreme tippet. We've all been fishing that in the shop, and I think we all have nothing but good things to say about it. Trout Hunter is very similar. I'd say the biggest benefit from Trout Hunter is the abrasiveness. I just don't find the same kind of nicks and kind of like roughing of the line after fishing it for a long period of time, and then really high quality knot strength. So I would just really like those two, and I think Brady would probably agree with me, as I think we've both been fishing that Supreme quite a bit.
Yeah, no, definitely, and I think that's a big thing that a lot of people don't consider. Yeah, so I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily consider when they're looking at the breaking strength of their tippet is the actual wet knot breaking strength. And there can be a little bit of an inconsistency in the industry when you're looking at stuff, how they actually test and perform their tippet. And we really value the companies that they do their testing around the real world application of it. They want to see what just an overhand kind of wind knot breaking strength is going to be. The tensile strength's one thing, but when it comes down to it, you're fishing it, you're knotting it up, you're putting your flies on it, you're doing your line-to-line connections. That's really the key and most important piece of the puzzle, is having confidence in your line once you've got it rigged up and ready to go. And definitely a fluorocarbon material for us, and I think that's mostly what Max was speaking to there is fluorocarbon. Tends to be just a better performing product overall, especially when you're fishing subsurface. And if you do have to go down to those smaller line diameters when you're fishing tailwaters and the ultra technical water overall. We get a lot of people that come into the shop and say, well, what do I need for fishing the South Platte? Everybody says that I'm fishing tiny flies and I'm fishing really technical water. Do I need 6X and 7X? And there are situations where that's true, but we like to teach people that, well, start with what you can on the heavier side. If you can start with a 4X and still be successful in the day, the fish are going to be a lot easier to get in. It's going to be a lot better for them in the long run. you're not going to wear them out to the point of exhaustion on that high pressured water that everybody's fishing all the time. And then work your way down. If you're not getting success on that 4X, then go to the 5X and dip to the 6X if you have to in the wintertime when you're fishing tiny midges and the tricos and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys both mentioned knots. Knots are so important, and I think for beginning fly fishermen, like really practicing, learning and practicing your knots, and there's all different applications for knots. But like Max fishing for those giant fish, or fishing anywhere for that matter. Like I was out with my uncle this past weekend, and he loves to fly fish, but he needs to work on those basics when he's sitting at the house, those knots, because it's so important, and those knots can break so easy. And so, sitting at home and practicing your blood knots or your Albrights or your nail knot to your leader, like practicing those really good knots and getting familiar with them, so you can tie good knots. It just makes such a difference in your fly fishing. I'm sure you see that, Max. I'm sure knots are like number one for you, like fishing up north and fishing for those giant fish. If you don't have good knots, you're not going to catch big fish.
Yeah, usually the tippet's strong enough, the knot's probably going to fail before the tippet does. So like you said, just practice, and at this point probably time with my eyes closed, but it's always good to make sure everything cinches down correctly, get a little lubrication in there before you actually tighten up the knot, and make sure you know your knots.
Yeah, have to. Yeah, that's like number one, and and it can be difficult. You can't just know one knot. It seems like when you're changing tippet size or going from heavy to small, like there's different applications and knots you use for each one of those, and so learning every one of those and knowing when to use it is just so important, for fishing all water, really. Brady, you mentioned that the Northern Platte, man, that thing has some big fish in it as well. You say that they fish like a lot of small nymphs in that. It's really technical, huh?
Well, the South Platte specifically is what I was referring to, the South Platte here through Metro Era. Yeah, it's so much tailwater and so a lot of small flies, so the midge is the most important bug year-round, and especially through the winter months when you're fishing the South Platte. And it's just pressured. So many people are fishing it. Everybody kind of knows about it. It's accessible from Denver. You're at the river in some really great gold medal fisheries just an hour out of Denver, so a lot of people go and fish it. So the fish are smart and they know how to fight. So the knot strength is important there too, and making sure you have your knots tied correctly there is a big part of the game, because they know how to act when you get them on the line. They've done the dance before, so that is hugely important. And just making sure you have the right gear overall and how to play a fish and getting your right hook set is very important. All that good stuff. Yeah. Technical water, definitely very technical water.
Yeah, are guys using like I'm I learned how to nymph with an indicator, mending my line, like a real technical nymphing, and then long drifts way out in front of me, way below me. Like the one thing I can't get that and I think like anytime we take on new challenges in fly fishing, it just helps up our knowledge and instincts, and we can be more effective. But the one thing I haven't got into is the Euro nymphing, but it seems to be the new craze, and I hear guys talk about how effective it is, not using an indicator, being tight line to your nymphs, really getting them down quick. Are guys using the Euro nymphing out of Colorado, or are you using it personally, or are you fishing more standard nymphing techniques?
It's big. It's definitely very big. It's catching on. A lot of people are seeing the benefits and moving into that way. I do it a bit myself, and when I do, it's very effective. It's a very productive way to catch a lot of fish. You can really dissect the water down far beyond what you would with an indicator. You can look at the micro seams and a lot of the different flows and aspects to the river and kind of attack it very deliberately and tactically. And that direct connection to the flies does make a big difference. Like we talked about earlier when we were talking about fish and how they eat, they're very tactile eaters. A lot of that you don't even know happens when you're fishing an indicator, because it's so subtle. They're just coming along and barely touching and spitting them out so quickly that your indicator, if it moves at all, is just a very slight twitch. And a lot of people miss that and aren't getting their good hook sets on it. That's really eliminated when you have the Euro direct connection to your fly, contact nymphing, check nymphing, whatever you want to call it. It helps you keep in touch, having a nice sensitive tip, seeing your indicator, your cider material on the line. It's a lot easier to pick up those subtle takes, and you find a lot more fish that way. And it's definitely become a really popular method, specifically because of that. People are noticing that, the guy down the river's catching fish and I'm not. What's he doing differently? He's got his arm up in the air and out and above, fishing tight line to nymphs, and he's catching fish and I'm not. And then they come into the shop and they want to figure out how to do it. And they get excited. The takes are good too, because it's that tight line take, much like swinging flies. When you get to the end of your swing and you get that tight line take, so much of it's a feel, and they can be pretty aggressive, and it can be very exciting in that aspect too.
Super cool. Yeah, you guys sell everything for Euro nymphing in there at Avidmax, right?
Everything you need, yep. And we have good expertise. Steve, our marketing guy, he's definitely geeked out on it. If you want to talk to somebody that's gone down the dance and really sort of innovated some different rigging styles for it, he's a great guy to talk to. But we have people in the shop that are great with spay and Skagit and can help you get the right line on the right rod for your two-handed setup. We can get you set up with the Euro stuff and all the technicalities that go into building your leader setup down to your flies and rigging for that. Or if you're going on a saltwater trip and you're targeting bonefish and Great Lakes fishing, all that kind of stuff, we have everything you need and the expertise to help you figure out how to do it the right way. Being accessible to anybody that's targeting whatever species and whatever fish they want to go after is definitely one of our goals, and we like to help you out along the way. So.
Man, that's super cool. That's what you need, is like somebody that's experienced in it that catches fish that way, to be able to describe to you the techniques and the setup. Haven't talked me into it yet, but I know I should probably try it. I know what you're talking about with that subtle bite, and I also know what you're talking about, like tight lining. I know a lot of times fishing streamers will go by a rock or a deep run, and instead of stripping through that deep run, I'll tight line it through there and get it to sink down to the bottom. In that tight line, I know what you're talking about that eat. It seems like when you're fishing Euro nymphs, it's like you have to find the right run, right? You can't fish too far out. It's got to be like up and above you, and you got to be tight line, so you can't drift below you. And you also can't drift too far out. But that doesn't limit you. Like you talked about really covering the water, so you must be able to really cover each lane of water wherever that's at, no matter what the current is in there. And that's what makes you more effective doing it, or is it the bite, feeling that take, that makes you more effective?
I would say both play into it pretty strongly. It is very tactical in how you approach water. You're not just stepping in and fishing the seam across the river. You're looking at every close-up before you even step in the river. You're looking at all of the different aspects of it, how it's flowing, what rocks are causing different current seams, and all of that good stuff, and how you need to approach it. You do have to be more tactical because you are limited to reach. You can do some different things with rigging and different styles and lengths of rods and that kind of thing to really extend the options of fishing locations that you might be trying to get at. But approaching the water, really being kind of stealthy as you come up, working the water in a way that's tactical, that you're going to pick it apart and move forward. And it does kind of create a situation where you're thinking about places where fish are definitely holding that you might not have thought about because your indicator setup maybe didn't fish it the way that it needed to be fished in order to hit those right pockets and seams. But the take, that feel, is definitely a huge part of the success for Euro nymphing. Just being able to know exactly what your flies are doing when they're down at the bottom. You can definitely tell the difference from when they're just bumping on the rocks versus that subtle take. It's the minute kind of feel that you have when you're Euro fishing is a big difference and brings that success. So both definitely work a big play into that picture overall.
Ah, super cool. Yeah, it is super effective, and all those tournament guys use it when it like the money's on the line to be able to catch more fish than the next guy. So super effective. We haven't really seen it catch on in our northern rivers too much. I very rarely see anybody using it, but starting to see a couple guys using it, and I can see where it'd be effective. And it's just another tool for the toolbox, right? It's like if you have your Euro nymphing rod set up in your boat and you find the right run, like working it a little bit, and then finding some success with it, finding confidence in it, and then being able to look for that right run and cover it. So makes total sense. You talked about the swing and the spay. I'm a steelhead guy from way back. I grew up in the Olympic Peninsula and love going back every year, and I love that swing. And I've been able to take this swing and this the spay casting to the switch rods and the spay rods and be highly effective on these rivers out west for trout. Like, it's just amazed me. Like the eats I can get on this thing, and especially like as we get colder water in kind of the off months, a lot of times that swinging is way more effective than the strip pop on those streamers, and being able to swing these runs like I would a steelhead run, where I cast and I'm fishing down below me and swinging through the run like big inside corners. I also know that I can fish bigger water, and I can really mess with my my different weighted lines to be able to get my flies down in spots where guys can't even fish streamers, or they can't stand on the bank and work these big runs. And man, I've been able to catch some next level fish, like taking my swing game to trout. Max, have you found that? Like, do you guys do a lot of swinging up where you're at, or is it more stripping? But have you messed around with that spay at all, fishing for those trout and for those salmon up there north?
So I haven't necessarily gotten too much experience with the two-handed rod setup, but something that you brought up earlier that is very effective is fishing bigger streamers underneath indicators, and that kind of lends us to get down to the depth of where those fish are at, and a little bit easier to work from a boat, which is typically what we're operating out of. And like, you can pull over to, like, those inside bends, and you could throw a two-handed rod, and that'll be something that'll definitely happen more in the coming month or so, where you start seeing that a little bit more two-handed action. But fishing bigger streamers underneath the indicator definitely has a lot of different options as far as the way that you're presenting that fly to the fish, whether it's the dead drift, whether it's just using that indicator as kind of a pinpoint to know where your fly is at as you're just casting it and maybe swinging it through a spot, and even keeping the indicator out of the water and kind of Euro nymphing it like you were talking about as well, is just being able to change the application but having an indicator on there while you're actually, moving that fly through whatever water you're fishing.
Man, super cool. Brady, are you seeing more swing guys down in Colorado?
The trout spay is definitely catching on. It's something that more and more guys are doing. We see guys in the shop that are definitely getting into it and throwing meat. Dave he's kind of the guy in the retail store that has the expertise behind the two-handed, and he would say that's the only way to fish streamers, is throwing them on the on the swing and getting that take and getting them to come around like you're talking about, working your way down the river. It's the only way to go for him. And so he's been trying to talk me into it lately, but definitely there's been kind of a resurgence of people that are trying to step into that trout spay world and take that two-handed methodology of that, swinged fly into our smaller rivers here comparatively to the Pacific Northwest, and use that same application that can be so effective in that way.
Yeah. Well, and another thing that I found, Max, that would be cool for you is like, so fishing for steelhead, like we found, the swing is killer, and that's the ultimate way to catch those steelhead. But you're also fishing these rivers, in big 10-mile stretches where you're going down in a boat, where you can't swing as you're going down in a boat. So what we've taken on is like nymphing, and being able to nymph as we go down in between runs, in between these swing rods. And the nymphing is so highly effective for steelhead, and so we're actually fishing an indicator, but we're actually fishing two-handed rods, nymph setup, and it just like the longer rods give us so much more leverage. You can fish so much further out, and even when you stop, like we'll swing runs and then we'll run a nymph setup through it just because nymphing is so effective. And it's wild how many times you'll pick your buddy's pocket by running like a nymph setup behind a swinger. You let them swing the run first, and then you come down with a nymph setup, and they'll eat it. And so, like, and it's highly technical as well. Like, I think as nymphing, as technical fishing, being able to get your mends and get your dead drift and get those bugs to the bottom and then being able to set the hook on it. But we're fishing a lot of those switch rods and even the double handers up to, like, I'll fish a 7-weight, 12.5 footer going down in the boat. And I can just fish this big water, and I can fish further out, and I can get longer drifts, and I can set the hook and have more leverage on those fish. And so for steelhead, we've just been absolutely killing it using two-handed rods, using a floating line, and fishing a nymph setup with it. Have you ever seen anything like that up north?
Totally. Just out of the boat myself, I fish a 10-foot 7-weight. And that's in the chance of, running into those big fish where I feel like you need the 7-weight, but having that extra reach and kind of just at all aspects of like what we've talked about, the Euro stick is a 10-foot rod typically. Some companies are even going out to a 10-foot 6-inch or, an 11-foot rod, which helps with tippet protection and, protecting your knots a little bit better with just a longer rod. So definitely a wide gamut of application for whatever it is. And I think, we are just seeing a different use for kind of every piece of gear that there is or is being produced. There's just not just one use for that particular thing, but like you said, it's a tool in your tool bag, and finding what application will lend itself to, whatever water you're fishing.
That's super cool. Well, you guys, Avidmax has just been killing it here lately, and I can see why. They've got really fishy dudes working for them, and in you two and in the entire staff. So, man, it was just really fun to talk to you. Brady, closing thoughts on Avidmax or on fishing or anything you want to say?
Yeah, no, I just appreciate you having us on today, Brian. It was good talking with you. Always good to talk fishing. That's one of the things that we just love about working for Avidmax, is that affords us the opportunity to talk with people that come into the shop about fly fishing, hear stories about what they have going on, or pick up the phone for somebody that's down in Florida that needs a specialized line that's going out for bonefish or something. So we just like to be able to be accessible, and wherever you're at and whatever your needs are in the fly fishing world, your experience level, if you're just getting in, we don't want you to be intimidated. We want to help you kind of get that going. Or if you're on the far expert end and you need some advice for the specific tactic that you're after, we enjoy talking to you about it, and we just want to help you along the way. So that's definitely what I have found to be the most fulfilling working at Avidmax, and then just being able to get out and fly fish myself and put a lot of the things that I learn in talking with people in action in my own fishing endeavors as well has been great. So
super cool. Okay, I'm gonna get a hold of you. I got a bonefish trip coming up to the Bahamas. I'm super excited about it. And it's been a few years since I've fished salt. Like the last time was Key West down and through there. So I gotta get all set up for it. So yeah, I'm gonna get a hold of you and get some information and some bugs and see if I can't put my setup together for fishing the Bahamas. Max, super cool hearing about up north and a lot of your adventures
Definitely.
for those giant fish, man. I wish you all the luck for those giant rainbows. Closing thoughts, like how much longer are you up there? It sounds like the fishing's just turning on for those things.
Yeah, so I've actually, spent a couple of seasons up there, and in May I actually moved up there for good. So this is going to be my first winter up there. So I'll probably be making a few trips down, to the shop and checking in with everybody and actually getting some unfrozen water running in my feet. So, it's exciting to see what winter's going to be like up there, but definitely going to have to come find some water.
Yeah, super cool, guys. Well, yeah, thanks again for being on the podcast. We really appreciate you, and yeah, good fishing to both you guys.
You too, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, guys, that's a wrap. Just again, I want to thank Brady and Max for coming on, and I want to thank Avidmax for their support of the podcast. I really appreciate it. If you guys are in the market for anything fly fishing, they run a great operation, great online store, a great in-person store just outside of Denver. And I know anytime I'm in the market for anything fly fishing, I always check out Avidmax first. So thanks to those guys, and thanks to you guys for listening in. I sure appreciate the support. If you can rate and review on iTunes, that really helps me out. And also follow us on Instagram on Eastmans Fly Cast. So thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next week.